been asked to just lift up a few leadership thoughts. I learned a long time ago that I do not have good ideas, but I recognize them very well and almost never forget them once I learned them. And so I just want to say a few sentences about 5 of those ideas. The first comes from someone that I heard speak here in Oxnam Chapel almost 50 years ago, Martin Niemöller. He was a contemporary of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He, as an opponent of Hitler, was in prison, as was Bonhoeffer. Niemöller from 1938 to 1945, but unlike Bonhoeffer, he lived long enough for his prison camp to be liberated. The phrase from Niemöller that made such an impact was, "The people God has given us." And that helped me see that of all the thousands of things about leadership that we don't know, there are a few things we do. And one is, it's always about a group. It's always about others. It's not about the leader. The beginning point of leadership is not the leader. The beginning point of leadership is the people God has given us. It may be the youth and their parents. It may be a ball team. It may be a congregation. It may be a nation. But it's the people God has given us. The second idea comes from that wonderful definition of leadership by Scott Cormode. Leadership is helping God's people take the next fateful step. That helped me see that leadership is always about change. And that's for a theological reason. And that is, the current state of things is never synonymous with God's ultimate will. We can't become what we need to be by remaining what we are. So when people in churches say, when you talk about change, what's wrong with us? Well, you really could say a lot. But see, that's always the case. The current state of things is never synonymous with God's ultimate will. And then, in that same definition, I was struck by leadership is helping God's people take the next fateful step, not the next big step. When I took my first appointment out of seminary in Southwest Mississippi, very quickly I discovered that ideas that we, just a few weeks before in seminary, had considered to have been dead for 20 years. Not only were those ideas not dead, no one had ever considered they may ever die. Now, my classmates might have looked in on me and say, "Why waste your time?" Well, the reason was I was the only pastor they had. And I came to realize if they were going to move from here to here, probably they had to move from here to here to here, much as I had. And that's where I came to understand that our context has a claim on our leadership. Our context has a calling on our leadership that we have to take very seriously. And I came then to find my fulfillment not in doing what I was most interested in, but doing what I was convinced was God's next fateful step. I couldn't pretend I was the pastor of some other people somewhere else, but I had to engage there. That was very helpful for me when I was the pastor of 4 churches spread over 2 counties. In the largest church, I had 30 people. In the smallest, I had 2 people, at least when I arrived. After a couple of years of my great preaching, the church with 2 people had 2 people, and we were very grateful. By the grace of God, we still had 2 people there. The fourth thought is that maybe the word leadership is not the right word. Maybe the word leading is better. People will often ask me, who do you think are great leaders? And that's a hard question for me because I don't think in those terms. But when I'm pushed, I would say in the 20th century, I think Winston Churchill was a great leader, but not all the time. So what that helped me see, and I was very much influenced by the work of Mary Parker Follett, an independent intellectual in Boston who did her work in the first third of the 20th century, where she talked about, in the era of the born leader, she talked about multiple leadership, and that it's not so much a matter of discovering who are leaders and who are followers, but to realize that in any given day, all of us are leaders and followers and peers at different times. And genius is not trying to separate leaders from followers, but instead trying to determine what is our calling at that moment and being faithful to that. And then the fifth is that in organizations, in groups, power is always an expandable sum, not a fixed sum. In an organizational system, we'll tend to assume that power is a fixed sum. It's like a pie. If someone cuts a larger piece of that pie, it means that everyone else will get smaller pieces because it's a fixed sum. If someone gets a little bit, it leaves more for everyone else. And so the way that translates is, for me to be stronger, I've got to make sure other people are kept in their place, or somebody else has to be weaker. For the clergy to be strong, laity have to be weaker. For laity to be strong, we have to keep the pastors in their place. But instead, it doesn't work that way. Power is expandable sum. That is, if somebody's getting a larger piece of the pie, the whole pie expands and everybody else gets a larger piece of that pie. In other words, the more likely I am to be influenced by you, the more likely you are to be influenced by me. To me, the greatest example that I've come across of this involved a federal judge from Lincoln, Nebraska, Judge Warren Erbaum. He served on the Board of Trustees at St. Paul while I was there. He was appointed a federal judge in 1970. He just died this past July 28 at the age of 91. In 1974, it was decided that there would be one judge assigned to handle every case of the 150 defendants from the Wounded Knee incident. And Judge Erbaum was selected for that, and it occupied the next years of his life. When the first trial was beginning, he invited his bishop at that time, Don Holter, to come for the first week of the trial. And Bishop Holter was the first one to tell me about this, and since then I have heard it from many other people. Bishop Holter said on the day of that first Wounded Knee trial beginning, he said, although nothing was being said in the courtroom, you could feel the tension between whites and Native Americans. It was time for the trial to begin. The door opened. The bailiff asked everyone to stand, and all the whites stood, and not a single Native American stood. And Judge Erbaum, was a very small man in stature, went up, told people to be seated, and he said, before the trial begins, I want to make a couple of announcements. One is, I know that standing for a judge may not be a part of your cultural tradition. And if that's the case, I want you to know I do not take it personally. The second announcement is that witnesses will be sworn in on a Bible. But if there is something more sacred in your tradition, you may be sworn in on it. And the trial started. Bishop Holter said, the next day, when the door opened, before anything was said, you know what happened? He said it's like a pin was stuck under everybody, that everyone, 100% stood. The more likely you are to be influenced by me, the more likely I am to be influenced by you. Thank you so much. God bless you all.